subscribe. In the year 1119, the Holy Land burned beneath the sun. Jerusalem, newly seized by Christian armies during the First Crusade, was both sacred and perilous. Pilgrims from across Europe traveled its roads, their hearts filled with devotion, but their journeys haunted by terror. The paths to the Holy Sepulchre were no gentle ways. They were stalked by raiders and mercenaries who thrived on plunder. The faithful carried prayers upon their lips, but often met with swords at their throats. It was into this landscape of dust and danger that 9 knights swore a vow. Beneath the ruins of Solomon's temple, they promised not conquest, but protection. They would guard the pilgrims. They would ride where fear waited. They would be monks and warriors, men of the cross and men of the sword. They called themselves the Poor Fellow, soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. To the weary pilgrims they became angels in armor. Their white mantles marked them, and their red cross glowed like fire against the sun. They were not rich. Their horses were so few that 2 men sometimes shared one steed. They lived in stables, not palaces, yet they became the guardians of the roads to heaven. The humble order grew beyond its vow. Europe loved the image of warrior monks. Donations poured in, lands, gold, privileges. To give to the Templars was to store up favor in heaven. Soon they spread across kingdoms. They built castles, ruled estates, commanded fleets. In every port stood a Templar house. In every court their presence was felt. They mastered a new art, the promise of credit. A pilgrim in Paris could leave his fortune in Templar hands, travel light across the sea, and reclaim it safely in Jerusalem. Their system was the first great chain of finance in Europe. Kings borrowed from them. Princes sought their blessing. They grew into more than knights, keepers of treasure, secrets, and power. But power breeds suspicion. How could men sworn to poverty hold such wealth? How could servants of Christ own more castles than most kings? Whispers turned to shadows. Did they kneel before God or something else? The year was 1307. France was drowning in debt, and King Philip IV, called the Fair, saw salvation in betrayal. The Knights Templar had grown rich, their treasuries swollen with loans to kings. Once the sword arm of Christianity, they now stood as creditors above their crown. To Philip, they were no longer holy warriors. They were prey. With Pope Clement V bent to his will, Philip struck. At dawn on Friday, the 13th of October, soldiers swept across France. In Paris, in castles, in villages, Templars were dragged from their beds and bound in chains. Old knights, young squires, even servants, all accused of heresy, corruption, and blasphemy. The charges were grotesque, the worship of demons, obscene rituals, the trampling of the cross. Lies whispered in taverns became weapons in court. When words did not suffice, torture delivered confessions. Men were stretched on the rack, their joints torn apart. Others were scorched with fire until their feet crumbled to ash. Some confessed to every crime, desperate for release. Others died silent, prisons filled with men once sworn to guard faith. Their fortress in Paris stood abandoned, its silence heavier than war. And yet, amid the ruin, a rumor whispered that carts of treasure slipped away before dawn, relics and gold spirited into the night. Friday the 13th became more than a date. It became a curse, a memory of betrayal. When the red cross of the Templars was stained not by infidels, but by their own king. Among the captives stood Jacques de Molay, last Grand Master of the Templars, a knight for 4 decades, hardened by crusade. He rotted in chains for 7 years. Trials demanded his confession. Torture bent him, yet he retracted each time. He was old but unbroken. In March of 1314, a scaffold was raised on the Ile de la Cité in Paris. The crowd gathered, the scene black at their backs, the torches bright in their eyes. De Molay was brought forth, bound to the stake. One last time he was urged to confess. He refused. As flames rose, his voice cut through smoke and fear. He called upon heaven to summon both king and pope before the judgment of God within the year. It was not a plea, it was a curse. The fire consumed him, yet his words endured. Within months, Pope Clement V lay dead. That same year, King Philip IV fell lifeless from his horse. To the people, it was no coincidence, it was vengeance. And so Jacques de Molay's curse was etched into legend. France had slain a man, but in doing so had birthed a myth. Each time Friday the 13th returned, his shadow followed, a reminder that betrayal carries its own judgment, and fire leaves echoes that never die. Fairy tales normally begin with hope, with kingdoms of light, with heroes chosen by heaven, with journeys that promise salvation. But this tale does not walk in light. It drifts in shadow where knights become ghosts and oaths turn into curses. The treasure of the Templars was never found. Some whisper it lies beneath mountains, guarded by spirits that never rest. Others swear it crossed the sea to seed new brotherhoods in hidden chambers. The order was broken in body, but never in myth. And what of Friday the 13th? The world still shudders when the date arrives. Buildings skip the number, calendars are marked with dread, and silence deepens, as though the centuries themselves remember. The knights who once swore only to guard the pilgrim have become something else. Their story is no longer of flesh and bone, but of curse and echo, of fear that lingers long after swords have rusted. Once upon a crime, faith became betrayal. Once upon a crime, justice turned to ashes. Once upon a crime, a legend was born that will never die.